What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Fluff Hammer. Today we have the new Tyranid Screamer Killer. Absolutely epic sculpt in the vein of the original. Most of us who've been seeing this box set will be looking forward to getting their hands on this model, especially Tyranid fans. You will not need an airbrush for today's video, however it will quickly speed up the process if you have one available. We've started with an all-over coat of black. I have used matte black from Colourforge for this particular one today. And we're going to be starting with a base coat of Mephiston Red from Citadel. Like I said, I'm going to be doing it through the airbrush, purely because it saves a lot of time. However, you can definitely achieve very similar result through the paintbrush. So it's going to be aiming to hit all the flesh areas with the Mephiston Red, and then leave as much of the carapace areas that you can black. This is a bit of a time trade-off here. The quicker you get the red done, obviously, the better. But if you cover all those black scales with Mephiston Red, you're then going to have to go back and black all the scales out. So the more of the scales you can leave black here, the more time saving you'll have later on. Or you can save some time here and kind of get the red down a lot sooner. However, you're going to then drag into having to repaint probably 2 coats of thin black over every single bit of scales. When you're using the airbrush, as you saw there, I'm positioning my hand really carefully so that my finger protects the claw and also the kind of spines at the top of the claw. And that's for a very specific reason. That's so that we can protect those areas from getting red on the areas we want to be black. So it's almost like masking, but just using your hands in a clever way. You don't need gloves, they aren't compulsory. However, I have loads because my spray booth is set up at work. And yeah, it's just much easier than having to keep kind of trying to wash all of this paint off your hands. And it looks better as well. Next up, we're going to be adding Evil Sunz Scarlet into our Mephiston Red. We're looking to do about a 50-50 mix here. And again, this stage can be applied through the brush, absolutely no problems. The aim with the brush would be to go around and just leave the darkest recesses, Mephiston Red, and kind of bring everything else up. Quite a lot of the skin, to be fair here, to 80-90% of it up to the Evil Sunz Scarlet Mephiston Red mix. I'm going to be doing it through the airbrush, so it's kind of a much easier way of just getting automatic highlights, because what I can do with that is angle it kind of 45 degrees down towards the model or even higher, so I'm aiming directly down, and that will give me a nice kind of visual line of sight where the light is hitting. So you get to pick your light source with the airbrush and do it like that. But again, this is absolutely not compulsory. You can do this with a brush, no problems at all. So we're going to go around again here, like I said, 80-90% of the flesh. Highlight it all up with the Evil Sunz Scarlet and get it as bright as we can. Next up, we're going to be going in with the Evil Sunz Scarlet. And again, I'm going to be doing it through the airbrush to save time, but it could be done with the brush, no problems at all. This is another kind of stage, it's going to add a lot more brightness to the model, which is good. And we're just going to work it all the way around. Again, being a little bit more select where we hit now. As you can see, I've decided to do a kind of light source mainly from the top right hand corner, aiming down on the model. So I'm going to be mindful of it, especially with the arms sub-assembled. I'm going to be working out the angles on which the arms will be sitting on the model, and then trying to highlight them also from the same kind of light source. I'll put a little arrow on the screen so you can kind of get a hint of where the kind of light source is coming from. Hopefully it'll be making a bit more sense to you like that. But yeah, we're going to go all the way around the model with this again, and mainly kind of where we were hitting 80-90% of the flesh, we're now only looking to hit probably 40% of this with our brightest tone of red before we start adding in other colours for highlights. So next up, we're following the palette from the heavy metal scheme here, so we're going to be adding Ungor Flesh to the Evil Sunz Scarlet. Now, in hindsight, this is probably a layer I would have done with the paintbrush. I would have probably used this as my first edge highlight rather than doing it through the airbrush. It looks nice and orangey in the airbrush, but it's actually mega desaturated. So it ends up kind of giving the model a little bit of a pinky tone, which obviously we're going to correct, which won't be a problem at all a little bit later in the video. But yeah, in hindsight, I think I probably would have gone around this now with the brush using this tone, and that would have been our first highlight stage with the brush. Next up, we will be going into Ungor Flesh and Evil Sun Scarlet with the size 2 brush. Just make sure it's nice and thin. Obviously not a glaze consistency, more like a layer consistency. We're probably roughly 2 parts water to 1 part paint here, which gives it a lovely flow on the brush. As you can see, we aren't having any drying problems or clumping problems. The thickness of your paint is really important here if you're going to try and do these kind of nice sharp lines. So yeah, just make sure that it's flowing really nicely on your palette. At this point, it's kind of up to you how long you want to spend on the model. I'm trying to get this done in a reasonable time frame. This is more of a kind of tabletop standard piece as opposed to kind of doing it for something like a painting competition or something. So albeit I want it to look very good, I'm going to be trying to limit myself kind of under the 5-hour mark for this whole model, which is quite a short time frame for such a large piece. So yeah, we're going to have to see how we get on with that, but this is kind of one of your most time intensive stages. So yeah, just kind of set yourself a goal and work to it. You're going to head around all the legs as well, picking out all the edges. I've kind of just gone with a bit more select highlights. I haven't highlighted everything. I've just had to kind of pick and choose what bits I am and what bits I aren't highlighting. After that, we're going to be going into the Ungor Flesh as well, which again, like I said, we're following the heavy metal recipe here, and we're going to be doing the absolute sharpest, tightest edge highlights that we can, just kind of picking out some really select parts through really raised parts or anywhere where like multiple other highlights will join, and we're just going to go around as neatly as we can, as you can see, just picking out really sharp fine highlights on it. Next up, we'll be going into Dead White and Ungor Flesh 50-50 mix. This doesn't have to be Dead White from Vallejo. My normal go-to is Bold Titanium White from Pro Acryl, but Bold Titanium White was not anywhere to be found, so I just grabbed the Dead White from Vallejo. And here we're basically just going to be picking out some really select highlights and just doing some tiny little dots. If you're struggling with this stage, just go and look at any Games Workshop models and you'll find out there's some tiny little dots on the heavy metal paint schemes, and that will just give you a bit of an idea where to place these. But yeah, anywhere where you've got your brightest highlights, just add a couple of tiny little dots. Again, like I said, we're following the scheme that Heavy Metal have posted up for Behemoth, and that includes a recessed shade of Corn Red. So now we're going to be working our way around, and we're going to be using a really dilute mix here. It's about 7 parts water to 1 part paint, and we're going to be going around all the like recesses, and we're going to do like a deep shade. So you're just working around as neatly as you can, trying to avoid any pooling. That's the key here. So you're using it as a thin layer of paint. I think a lot of people go wrong with glazes and stuff where they actually treat it like a wash, where you apply a bit too much. Whereas here, you're really looking for just a thin layer of paint. Anywhere where it pools or puddles, just wipe your brush off and use the brush to soak up any excess. So we're just going to neatly work all the way around the model here again. A bit of a slow stage, but there isn't a huge amount to do, so as neatly as you can, just pick out all your recesses. Next up here, we're going to be adding Abaddon Black into our Corn Red glaze. So we'll be roughly now 2 parts paint, roughly 14 parts water. So every 1 part paint, you want 7 parts of water. It's nice when you've got a pre-made glaze like this, because you can just add a little bit of black into it. I've just added a little bit more of the Corn Red glaze, just to kind of add a bit more red back to it. Gone a bit too dark. And basically what we're going to try and do, as you can see, we've got some lovely shading building up from that Corn Red glaze. We're just going to be trying to hit the even deeper recesses here. So just try and get it in the absolute darkest of gaps. Anywhere around this kind of chitinous plate. Anywhere on the face which looks particularly dark. And then these little bobble holes in his head are the perfect example of where you want the darkest parts to be. Okay, so here's where we've got to now. It's looking pretty good, but like I said, it's just looking a little bit too desaturated for me. It's a little bit on the pink side. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire up 5 parts of contrast medium to 1 part Blood Angels Red. It's going to be basically making an ink out of this. I do have an AK red ink somewhere, which I really like, which is probably what I would have used, but again, I couldn't find it. But the contrast paints, especially the new ones, are very, very similar to an ink. So what we're going to do is, just load that up into the airbrush again. Like I've said a million times in this video, you don't need an airbrush for this. You could just mix it up on your palette and apply it with a large brush. If you're going to do it with a brush, just make sure and move nice and quickly to keep it as smooth as possible. But just so you've got a bit of an idea here what I'm talking about with the saturation, the one on the left has had the Blood Angels and the one on the right hasn't. As you can see, it's just such a richer, deeper red. It's really made a massive difference for a really quick stage. After that, what we're going to do is grab the Coal Black by Pro Acryl. Again, any black will do. A lot of people use the Vallejo Black. I just really like the Coal Black from Pro Acryl. It's nice and matte. And we're going to go around the entire model, and this is where, depending on how well you've masked earlier, you can save a lot of time. I'm going to save a lot of time here by using a much larger brush. I'm going to be using a size 6, which I know is really large, so you're just going to have to use a brush that you feel comfortable with. I find it easy enough to find a sharp edge on this to get into these chitinous plates, but the thing you can do is use a large brush to hit straight down the middle, and then just use your smaller brush to work your way around the edges later on. So that is 2 options. But yeah, just use the biggest brush you can, comfortably kind of keep within the lines, and work your way around and pick all the black areas out here. Once all the black areas were dry, I decided it was time to assemble the model, and then we're going to go into painting these chitinous plates. So we're starting off with a 50-50 mix of Sotek green and black, and we're going to work our way around all these plates, kind of dragging back towards the edges, trying to do the classic heavy metal kind of spiky chitinous style. After that, we're going into pure Sotek green, and basically the same situation applies. We're going to try and do slightly finer lines of that Sotek green inside the Sotek and black mix. So basically, essentially it's a highlight, but we're just going to have to try and be really neat here. As you can see, I've got a nice point on my brush, and I'm basically dragging it back towards the edge of the plate, being careful not to clip the next plate down, obviously, because that will be in the black area where we want to try and keep it the darkest. But yeah, just do this either way you can. Sometimes the easiest way is to pick up the top of the plate and drag your brush down into it. Some people find it much easier to, like I am, starting in the plate and then drag the brush out. So you'll just have to see which way works better for you. As you can see here, I'm adjusting the angle of the model so it suits me, and you'll just have to do the same, adjust it so it's where you need it to be. Next stage after that will be Baharoth Blue, and again we're just going to follow the exact same principle, try and be as neat as you can and highlight the direct Sotek green. Here you're just going to have to be as neat as you can. Like I said, if you wanted to skip one of these stages, it would speed up the painting time immensely. The total kind of paint time for this project, about 60% of it was going around all of these chitinous plates and doing all these edge highlights and like kind of spiky textures. So this was 60% of the total paint time of this model. So just bear that in mind. Next up will be the teeth and mouth. I actually failed to press the record button on the mouth. But the teeth, what we're going to be doing is, as neatly as we can, picking out all of the teeth with Morghast bone. We're going to give them a wash of Agrax Earthshade once it's dry, and that will fill in all the little recesses in between. So make sure with the Morghast bone stage that you just colour all of the teeth, and including all the gaps in between as well. So then the wash can settle nicely, giving us a nice shade. After that, I'm going to be highlighting them with Ushabti bone, and then a little dot of off-white from Vallejo on the tips of the teeth, just to give them a spot highlight. I would recommend painting the mouth first, instead of doing them after the teeth, because obviously getting in, under and behind the teeth is going to be harder once they're painted. So picking out the mouth first will definitely help us make less errors. The mouth was Warlord Purple from Vallejo, and I just progressively added white, any brand white. I used Pro Acryl for this, and just basically blended it all the way out to the end of the tongue, and that was that stage complete. So here's an action shot of where we are now. I'm going to be going around and filling in all of the carapace, which, like I said, is taking a serious amount of time. I think it now took about another 2.5 hours to work my way around and fill in all this carapace really neatly. But make sure you don't miss any parts. Make sure and get all the bits on the edge of the claws and everything as neatly as you can. Like I said, I didn't film all of that because it was just hours and hours of work. So, yep, I'm getting through it. And then we'll be going on to Mechanicus Standard Grey, and that's what we're going to be using on the claws and the hooves. So it's just basically picking out some kind of bony areas to separate it from the carapace. We're going to be thinning this down, 2 parts water to 2 parts paint, so 50-50. And then again, we're going to kind of replicate the same like streaky patterns that we've got on the carapace, but on the hooves. We're lucky with the hooves because they're much more textured, so you just basically have to follow the lines. But they are quite difficult when they're assembled against the base like this. So you just need to be as careful and neat as you can again. Work your way around. And then when we go on to the claws, I'm just going to be starting by kind of mainly doing the insides of the claws. You've got a nice hard edge, so you can highlight that nice and easily with the edge of your brush. And then I'm just going to be picking out a few select highlights around the kind of pitted holes towards the top of the claws, and then any kind of other little edges that are sticking out, also with the Mechanicus Standard Grey. And then I'm going to be using a 50-50 mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Ulthuan Grey to do a second edge highlight with this. Again, just working my way around neatly, picking out the finer details and trying to get it fine inside the first highlight. After that, I'm going to be adding some colour to the ends of the claws. So I'm going to be putting, again, Mechanicus Standard Grey into the airbrush. I'm going to be using my hand to mask off areas here. It's very, very easy with airbrushing. When you get the right angle, you can quite easily mask off areas like this, especially when they're sticking out from the model. Alternatively, if you don't want to use your hand, you obviously can use something like a bit of paper or a business card, something like that. But yeah, I'm going to be fading it with Mechanicus Standard Grey from the tips of the claws back into the base. And then again with the airbrush, I'm going to be using a final highlight of Ulthuan Grey, just very, very subtly on the tips of these claws. And last but not least is an optional extra. We're going to be adding some spit trails to the mouth. I've chose to use Green Stuff World UV resin. I like that it's so fast to set. It's literally 3 or 4 seconds with the UV lamp. What I've done here is just found some kind of stick resistant paper, and I've just put some dollops of the UV resin on, and I'm going to drag it about with the cocktail stick to make some really thin trails. And then I'm going to use the UV torch to set those little trails, and I can then go around and cut them with a scalpel to length and size. Again, you can kind of cut them lengthways and widthways to narrow them down to nice and small trails. And then I'm going to be using a little dab of the UV resin into the mouth. I'm going to attach the spit trail, both ends with the UV resin again, and then just cure that with the resin torch. The last thing I'm going to do after that is just spatter a little bit of blood for the blood god onto the claws. Again, very, very minor here, hardly any at all. Just a little bit of spot colour just to add a bit more interest to the model. And that will be our big Screamer Killer finished. So I hope you're all enjoying your new Leviathan box sets. It's brand new out this weekend. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned something. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.